Hello everyone and welcome to Daily Critique number 15, which means we've got through 2 full weeks of these daily critiques, which is some sort of achievement for me because I've actually spent an entire year trying to release some videos of the Drakensberg. There's still one more episode to come there, so I'm usually pretty slow at these things, so it's a bit of a personal achievement to turn something out every day. But there you go. Because it's the 15th episode, it does mean I get to announce the print winner from last week. For those of you that don't know, PhotoSpeed are a local fine art paper company who've been kind enough to offer a free print to the photographer each week that ends up in the production of the most interesting video, if that makes any sense. But their papers are really fantastic. I use them myself. I've got a whole drawer full of them underneath this desk actually. So they really do make some excellent papers, and it's great to have them supporting this project, if you like, as they have many other photographers around the country. So the winner of last week is Simon Atkinson, in part because his images were really fantastic, but also because he was brave enough to share that Ben A panorama with me with its vertically stretched mountains, which I'm sure he knew would ruffle my feathers. So well done to you, Simon, and if you just get in touch, then I'll set you up with PhotoSpeed to get this free A3 print to you. Today we're going to discuss the images of Iain Macleod. Ian actually came with me on a trip to Iceland last year. He's a really good photographer, but these photos are of Snowdonia. Because they're of such a high standard, there's not really a specific theme for me to tackle again, so we're going to do the usual general composition chat and a little bit on editing too. So let's get started. So these are the 5 images that Ian sent in, all of the glitters in Snowdonia, and we're going to do this one back to front, so I'm going to be really harsh, I guess, at the start with this image, and then gradually sing Ian's praises with the other shots. So first off with this, I mean, spectacular lighting, really unbelievable conditions, the kind of conditions that many landscape photographers would dream of, with fantastic clouds overhead and the sun just shining in through a gap here, making lovely sun rays on the hills in the distance. There's this amazing layering effect and all these geometrical shapes of the hills all interlocking together. That area of the image is particularly beautiful, and it creates a lovely colour palette with all this amazing texture and colour in the sky above here. I like the white balance that's been chosen because it's cold enough to keep that colour separation that I may have mentioned in other videos. So you can see some of the cooler tones in the shadows of the clouds here, and that helps the warmer tones really stand out. So I think the white balance has been very well chosen. And yeah, visually it's spectacular. I think most people would look at this and think, wow, what a fantastic photo. Unfortunately, I'm looking at this with the critical eye of a photographer, and whilst I sympathise with Ian being presented with these spectacular conditions and trying to make the most of them, I suspect he just wasn't in an area where he could really do this kind of lighting justice. That's one of the problems you can find in the mountains, of course, is that you just can't get around quickly enough. And if something unexpected happens, you can be a bit stumped. So compositionally, this foreground is very blocky and not really that interesting, to be honest. There isn't much to break up these 2 heavy shapes in the foreground, and I'm not sure that they really complement the background very well. You have this lovely coherent colour palette in the top half of the image, all these warm tones, rich detail, and beautifully edited, as I said a second ago, but the 2 halves just really don't tie together. There's no continuity there, so it feels very much like an image of 2 halves here. And on the editing side, it's really quite a good job, except for that one cardinal error that I mentioned in yesterday's video, which is having whites that aren't white. So if I just switch to a white brush here, so you can see how not white this white is. it's really quite a long way off. Now, this can happen for a whole host of reasons, but generally it's as if you try to recover highlights or whites too much. And in fact, you can even see some sort of artifacting going on in this area here. It's a long way off being natural in this particular area, and I think keeping that bright luminance, that bright white in this area, and then brightening up the local area just to soften the highlight transitions would be really effective, because you can actually see some strange mustardy colours coming into the brightest highlights here as well. It really does look quite odd. And of course, that source of the light is right on the edge of the frame as well. So a bit of a problem there too, unfortunately. So as spectacular as the conditions are, and as well edited as it is, with the exception of that localized area, unfortunately the composition doesn't really tie together. So nice image, but I'd be looking for a bit more from somebody of Ian's caliber as a photographer. So here's a really beautiful image looking down into the valley from near Igan, and this is a mountain called Trivan in the background there. There's not really much to critique here. I love this foreground, these jagged rocks, and you'll see these are used pretty regularly through the next few images, because there is some fantastic geology up in these mountains. And this is taken, I believe, in midsummer, around June kind of time, when the sun is rising down the valley. So I'm sure that Ian has quite deliberately gone up here to have the sun rise in this position relative to the valley, and you can see how effective that is as a composition. What I would say is it's perhaps a little bit narrow, particularly with portrait format images. I do prefer slightly squarer crops, like 4:5, for example, because I just feel if you have a thin format like this, you just read straight down the image. It's a bit too fast, if that makes sense. Whereas if you put your frame edges maybe here and here, then you lose relatively little. But it just slows the format down a little bit. And you could also probably shoot a little bit wider here. I'm not exactly sure how the left and right edges would resolve themselves, but there's two ways you could solve that. The edit is pretty much perfect. Really nice contrast balance here. If I was saying how would I make the best of this I possibly could, well, incidentally, I don't have a higher resolution or the raw file here, because Ian was unable to provide those to me, but I'd certainly clean up the sun. I've mentioned this in other videos, and maybe I'll do a specific video in the future. But very quickly, if you want to clean up a flare, then you can try manipulating the red channel and setting a black point in the red channel, which will take red out of the image. So then if I invert this mask, so Control I to invert it, so it's now black, so that change is not being applied anywhere. Then I select a white brush at a low opacity, so let's select 50% here, just for speed more than anything else. I'd usually do 10% or something like that. Then you can paint away flare, and the more carefully you do that, so I'll just do a 20% brush here. You can do that really, really well, and start to get rid of these uglier areas of a sun star. So that's sort of before and after. Very, very quick way of doing it. And you can even do it with more complex flare like this. But actually on this side, I would probably do a bit of cloning. So select my area, select a small brush, put the opacity to something fairly low, and then I'm just going to gradually build up the clone over here so that I don't tonally affect these areas too much. And you do have to build this up over time. It's not quite as quick as the other process, but again, it can be very effective. And similarly in this area, just painting in like this. I'll do a proper video on this in the future at some point, but you can really make these sun stars look much tidier. And then finally, around the sun, you can just see some weird saturation issues. you've got a sort of rich yellow right next to the sun, and then it becomes a paler yellow, and then a band of richer yellow again. And if you look in the channels here, there'll be telltale signs of that. So that's the red channel, no detail at all, not that surprising. The blue channel, again, a few hard edges here and there, so you'd want to see a bit more of a bleed, a soft bleed like you see here. Like this edge running along here shouldn't be darker than above it, obviously. And then the blue channel, I guess, is where it's going to be really weird. Yeah, so that's what's causing all the problems there, the blue channel. So you could either directly manipulate this channel to fix it by blurring and cloning and so on, or you can just try and do a bit of cloning on the RGB layer, and then you're kind of working with it as you see it. And I'd possibly try and do something like this as well. So a brightening adjustment, and then select a large soft edge brush, Control I to invert that mask again, and then 20%. And yeah, I'm just going to gradually brighten up this area so that there's a nicer, softer highlight transition around the sun, and that's going to start to soften some of those problems. So I do a mixture of cloning and that kind of brightening effect to make the highlight roll off a bit more pleasant. But yeah, fantastic image, brilliantly edited otherwise, and yeah, really very nice. Okay, so now we're on to 3 images, all from the Castelli Gwent area on Glyderfach. This is looking towards Snowdon, as I think all 3 of these images are. Yes, well, Snowdon's in all of them anyway. So this is the summit of Snowdon, and this is the Llewellyn Ridge here on the left. I do like this composition. There's, it's really nicely edited again. Really beautiful conditions. Great to have snow in Snowdonia. And there's a bit of hoarfrost on the ice, a bit of rime ice on the rocks here. I would say compositionally, it's good. It's not ideal, but then I think were I to shoot this, I'd probably come up with a similar compromise. This area here, need to turn the opacity back up. This area here is a little bit dead compared to the rest of the composition, but I think it balances fairly well on balance, partly because of this diagonal coming through, and this patch of rime ice here just helps to break up the texture there, and the shadow helps too. So it's not quite a flat textureless area, and if it were fresh snow, then I think that would be more of a problem compositionally, but as it is, it works quite well. I can't help notice the proximity between these rocks and the edge of the frame, and the same on the other side. And personally, I would compose this just slightly wider. There's even a little bit of a proximity issue here, possibly. But other than that, really nice shot, very nicely handled. And I again love these explosions of igneous rock here. Very dramatic. It's what makes the Castelli Gwent area so fantastic to photograph. And this is Castelli Gwent itself, the Castle of the Winds, with Glyderfach in the background, and so that's this mountain here. And Snowdon is just obscured in the back there. This is one of my favourite locations in the UK to shoot. There's lots of compositional options, and Ian's found a really good composition here. I think it's really nicely broken up, beautifully lit, and the editing again is perfect. So I really can't critique this image in any meaningful way other than to say that I love it, and great atmosphere, and really nice general separation between these rocks, in large thanks to the snow that surrounds them. And finally onto this image, which actually I saw, I can't remember if Ian took it last year or the year before, but this is an image that immediately stuck in my mind as one of my favourite images actually from the past couple of years, especially of the Welsh mountains. And that's largely because I think the composition is very bold and also very unique. I've never seen a shot of this particular composition before, and because these mountains are relatively accessible, they do get well photographed. But I just think that this is a really brilliant arrangement in spectacular conditions for taking moody photographs of the mountains. I love this hint of light on these rocks. I mean, there's such a strong focal point here, so aggressive, these rocks. They really speak of the wildness of the mountains, and the clouds passing through the valley here, rolling over Snowdon, only aid in that idea. And really, really well edited too. Being super picky here, but there's the slightest fringe, cyan fringe on the side of the rocks here, and red on the other. So possibly Ian hasn't checked his remove chromatic aberration checkbox in Lightroom or whatever raw converter he uses. But wow, just really, really love this image. And I've just spotted maybe these highlights are a little bit hot, being very picky again. But yeah, spectacular shot that, Ian, and thank you very much for sending those images in.